There's a pretty large number of games that do one thing like insanely good, but drop the ball in almost every other aspect of the game. And I think it's interesting to speculate on what the game could have actually been. Whether the game had like stunning graphics and really lackluster gameplay, or they had really good gameplay but the graphics were terrible. Or maybe the side quests were really good but the story itself was actually terrible. And unfortunately, Wolong Dynasty falls into this category. It has some really good aspects that are very, very well done, but there are also a lot of not so good aspects of this game also, and depending on the type of player you are, or what's important to you and in your playing style, or what's important to you when playing a game, you may love the game despite its flaw, or you may think the game is a total waste of time and money. It's kind of up to you. This game to me was very weird to review, since at some points I did find myself enjoying it, but I also didn't at all enjoy it. And the more we talk about it, hopefully you'll understand what I mean, or maybe you'll watch this and think I have no idea what I'm talking about and turn it off and move on with your day. I mean, you never know. This was a game that I originally saw the trailer for about a year ago, thought, oh wow, that looks really cool, and then completely forgot about it. In my defense, there's been a lot of hype around game releases this year specifically, and this game kind of got pushed behind the likes of other popular releases. And after I finished my playthrough for, I think, Like a Dragon Ishin, I strolled into GameStop, as I do, and saw the game on the shelf and immediately went to buy it because I remember how interesting the game seemed to me when I saw that trailer at first, and Team Ninja hadn't really disappointed me yet. I say this to illustrate that I really didn't have any expectations going to this game. I didn't expect it to be the best thing I ever played, and I definitely didn't expect it to be the worst. I didn't know anything about this game other than that it would be an RPG style game, and that's about it. This game really was a roller coaster for me, and of course I'll explain why later. There's a very specific reason why I say that. But before I get too ahead of myself, I do want to explain the change of scenery. I am back home. I was at my dorm in my school, or I was in my apartment, and my room is kind of a mess right now because I just moved all my stuff into here. So I normally would have the camera facing that way, but it will not be facing that way today. So yeah, and I haven't recorded in a long time. I was supposed to record this video like a week ago. I had finals, this isn't that, all that, doesn't matter. Sit back, relax, and maybe not relax because I'm not relaxed while filming this at all, but that's okay. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video, and let's talk about Wolong Dynasty. Now to start off, the story, or the lack thereof, because it really isn't a story. And not all games need to have a compelling story to be entertaining, but I do think that this game would have benefited from something a little bit more engaging, just like a little bit, because it wasn't. And the bits of the story they did include were vague and uninteresting. This is the type of game that just, you know, hands the player some small narrative beats just so you kind of know what's happening. I have come to realize that a lot of the characters in the game have a lot more like lore and historical significance, but I don't know much about Chinese history, so it didn't really captivate me at all. In some ways it was cool, but then like not really. I won't spend too much time on this section because the developers didn't either. I mean, you can enjoy the game without the story being included at all. And just the fact that it is there, I mean, I do have to kind of talk about it because it's there, but if it wasn't there, the game will be the same, I think. Basically, this game takes place during the fall of the Han Dynasty in around 184 AD or CE in China. It's a very mythical take on this event. You're playing as this nameless warrior with no background, no exposition, and it leads you to, like, I guess, create your own type of story. But, you know, I kind of wish there was a little bit of exposition or a little bit of storytelling revolved around the player that you are playing as. You kind of just pop out of nowhere and you're just, like, intertwined in this like historical, all these things happening, and you're just kind of there, and there's no questions asked about it, really. Hey Zuko, sorry, my cat just walked in. Hey buddy. Ah! He just attacked my finger, that's fine. Anyways, essentially a war has broken out over this like sacred elixir thing, and it can lead to immense power and immortality. The character you play as is first seen after being saved by a talisman, and then you're escorted out by this blindfolded guy, man, boy, whatever, and he helps you escape and navigate through this like corrupt area. However, by using the talisman, this figure known as the Taoist in Black appears and then kills the blindfolded boy who saved you. So yeah, the Taoist in Black, he wants the elixir basically to corrupt different divine beasts and claim all the power for himself, destroy the world, so on, all this typical bad guy stuff. The story isn't really strong past this point. Every cutscene is introducing these like famous and well-known figures, well known to some people, but not to me. And your character just kind of stands on the side and is like watching and nodding along because you don't talk or anything. I think that the inclusion of these figures was aiming to drive the story on its own, just like by the figures themselves being so prominent. But if you don't know the figures, you don't have any really effect by seeing them. So that I think it's kind of not the best. Maybe they could have went into a little more of the lore behind it to keep people who don't know about like the history and lore of like these Chinese tales and stuff. Zuko, please don't do that right now. Leave it alone, buddy. Okay. Yeah, like I was saying, if you don't know these figures or these people, the cutscenes and the story itself will be very cut and dry. Emphasis on dry because you won't know what's happening. It's kind of like, okay, let's get back to the combat. All the antagonists are evil and want to kill everyone, and all of your companions just follow your lead and entrust everything to you. The cutscenes are visually also nothing too amazing. I wouldn't say that they're bad. Well, I don't know, but I don't know if it was the usage of like the sound design or the music or the dialogue, but none of the scenes held any like stakes or emotional weight for me. I don't know if they were supposed to, but they didn't. There were a few scenes where like a hostage was involved, and I was just kind of like, oh, that's really too bad. Like, obviously you have to save him, but like, oh no, hostage. Like, I don't know. It's clear that the story isn't the main focus. It is very clear, like clear as the wind in the sky that you can't see. I do wish there was a little more done other than including famous historical figures, not relying so heavily on that, but I digress. And I can now move on to probably the highlight of this game, which is the combat. And after what I just said about how bad the story was, the combat is like a complete 540, 180, whatever you want to call it. It is amazing. I don't get to say that often, but this is a truly like rewarding, entertaining, and robust combat system. There's a lot to cover and go over, so bear with me. There's a lot to it. But I guess I'll start with some of the basic mechanics and go from there. The attacks that you use initially and most often are your basic attacks or your normal attacks and your spirit attacks also. Normal attacks are faster and deal less damage, and spirit attacks are more powerful but are far slower. It's really up to you and how you want to incorporate these attacks into your own combos. And therefore, you'll see a lot of different players utilize a lot of different move sets, combos, attacks. To add to this, different weapons are also equipped with their own unique special moves known as martial arts. And before we get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about the weapons. There's a wide range of weapons in this game, each with their own animations, move sets, combos, all that. And like I said, martial arts. And these weapons also have different star rankings and spell compatibility and boosts, which we'll touch on later with the boosts and the spells. For me though, I didn't find myself swapping between weapons aside from my loadout, which was my dual sabers and my cavalry spear, which were both 4-star for most of my playthrough. And one way I can see that as like intentional, like I said, they leave a lot of creativity and individuality to develop your own unique fighting style. But I wish I was able to experiment more with the weapons I found going through the levels, but they were always like weaker or duplicates, or I just didn't like using them. The same goes for the armor, which I don't think I ever changed until like the end. I think I started experimenting a little more, but I really only changed the cosmetic appearance of the armor because it didn't really matter too much, which we'll get into later with the combat because it doesn't really matter. You could probably go through the whole game with no armor, but the armor for me was a bit underwhelming, and a lot of the sets lacked variation and they all looked sort of bland to me, which is why I said I changed the cosmetic appearance of the armor that I did have. But yeah, I switched between the sets for cosmetic reasons only. I think I've said it like 50 times, but okay, now back to the combat. Defensively, you have the option to guard, dodge, or deflect, which is this game's, parrying system. And I cannot emphasize this next point enough. Parrying is an absolute must in this game. If you don't know anything else in this game, you have to learn to parry, because if you don't have a handle on the deflection system and the timing, the boss fights will make you want to launch your game into a ravine and blow it to pieces. This is why I say for me, this game felt like a roller coaster. Basically, when in a regular enemy encounter, and most notably in boss fights, you'll see like glowing red indicating they're about to do a critical blow. You can't dodge. I mean, you can dodge them, but you cannot guard against the critical attacks. You're basically going to want to parry this for two reasons. One, dodging doesn't really work in most cases and it's not, the best option to take. And two, when you do a successful parry against this critical attack, you have the possibility to stun your enemy and deal a huge amount of damage. Sounds great, yes? No. Because, my friends, parrying takes a bit to perfect, and you truly have to be perfect, especially for some of the later boss battles. Like, early on, they give you a little bit of leeway, but later in the game, there's literally no opportunity for you to get a good level of damage in unless you're parrying these attacks and stunning the enemy. One of the biggest tests of the parry system is the Lu Bu boss battle, which is, going back to it, one of my favorite boss battles, but when I first got there, it took me about 4 hours to complete, maybe longer, because I didn't have a handle on the parrying like I thought I did. Like, I was breezing past the game up until that point, and then I got the rudest awakening I've ever gotten in my entire life. You'll basically get this boss battle and rethink any ounce of confidence that you ever had. Unless you're just like that. Unless you're like that, then you'll be fine. But I was not like that. Yeah, like I said, this boss battle was just a skill check, literally, for the parrying system. Not even really for anything else, just for how good you are at parrying. And a bit ago, I said this game was a roller coaster, and I say that because at first, if you're like me, you're gonna struggle a little bit with the combat, especially because of the parrying. I'm used to rushing through a lot of combat sequences, but this game sort of forces you to be patient and be a bit strategic. You kind of have to study the movesets, get used to what the enemy is going to do, and then you can plan your course of action like accordingly. The first ever boss battle in this game took me 2 hours to beat. And I immediately panicked. I was like, oh my god, this is going to be a terrible game. I'm not going to be able to review it. I don't know what's going on. And after I finally beat the battle, to be met with the most anticlimactic cutscene ever, I immediately went and looked up, why am I so bad at wolong dynasty? And the first answer I got, skill issue. So I was like, you know what, let's go. Let's get to the nitty gritty. Let's cut down. And I was like, I'm just gonna have to get over myself and just practice, get this parry down. Yeah, I mean, the beginning, I died a lot. I ran away a lot. I was dodging a lot. I struggled with the parrying, but there was this very like pinpoint time. I don't remember what boss battle it was when I was like, whoa, like the parrying is getting a little, it's getting a little more normal to do. And I was like, oh, I'm starting to get the hang of it. And then, I looked forward to seeing the critical blows, the red glows, because then I was like, oh, this is the time when I can do all the damage and really, get what I need to get done. It was very rewarding. It was very satisfying to get these parries down and get these combos off. And the boss battles became more fun. By more fun, I meant they became the only part of the level that I look forward to, because the enemies were very easy after that, and they were very boring and very repetitive. They were too repetitive because they were the same. And the boss battles also became boring because some of the boss battles were reused, and they would take the bosses like the tiger and the gorilla, and they would use those as regular enemies. So you're recycling everything over and over, and all the enemies are the same. They have different movesets. Some of the enemies don't even really get to attack you before you slice and dice them. It's just I don't know. And the boss battles itself weren't even hard anymore, and the game just became way too easy. And it's weird to go from the game being so difficult to it being way too easy in the span of like towards the middle of the game is when I started to feel that. And so the middle to the end of the game was very repetitive, very boring. And it's a shame because the combat was really fun, but there's a reason you become so good at the combat is because you're facing the same enemies over and over again. So yeah, if you're struggling at first, you're gonna get good at it because you're facing the same people. Now, like I said, actually, I don't even think I said that, but I'm gonna touch on the enemy variety in a later section, but I want to finish up with the combat first because there's still a little bit more to talk about. The spirit gauge is a bar under your health, which can either be blue or red, positive or negative. You build the positive gauge by using basic attacks and deflecting. The positive spirit allows you to use your martial arts, spirit attacks, and spells. Using too much of the positive spirit, however, will build your negative spirit, and it's a little confusing at first. It's not really confusing, but to say it out loud, it didn't really sound right. But raising your negative spirit raises your chances of being stunned, and it also doesn't allow you to use martial arts if it's full. I really like how you have to really keep that gauge in mind. It's not just for decoration. It really does matter a lot, because being stunned due to the lack of awareness of the negative gauge can cause you to lose an entire boss battle in an instant. And it also works for the same for your enemies too. When you deflect enemies' attacks and use spirit attacks, you also can raise the enemy's negative gauge, which is how you stun them and deal large amounts of damage with a fatal strike, which I always love to see. You love to see a fatal strike. It's probably one of the most satisfying parts of the game. It does toward the end become very easy to exploit once you get the hang of it, but it's a nice overall addition. I really do enjoy it. There is literally so much to cover with the combat, and we still haven't even talked about the spells or morale yet. So just please bear with me. This is probably, it's the best part of the game, so there's going to be a lot to cover, and that's we'll get back to it. Just stay put. Okay, now we get into the juicy stuff. We have the magic spells, or that's what I call them. It's actually called wizardry spells, but magic spell sounds better, so that's what we're gonna call it. These can be used to do all sorts of things like regeneration, defense, range attacks, amplifications, short range attacks, all different things. There are 5 categories or types of magic spells: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Now, certain spells have different interactions with other spells. For example, water is stronger and sometimes negates completely fire spells. But however, once you get to a certain level and point in the story, it really doesn't matter too much because the fights do become easier, so we'll talk about that later. And I personally, I only use the fire and the wood spells. I use the wood spells the most far. Like, I basically only use wood spells. Fire spells just because they look cool, but there's also a skill tree system which allows you to unlock certain spells and upgrade certain categories like fire and water. I personally really only use fire and wood, like I said. For certain bosses early on, I used earth, but wood became my main set that I used because the divine beast was super useful, and I just really liked the spells that I could use. It was very versatile. I feel like the wizardry spells each have their own capabilities. For example, once again, this leads to a lot of unique playstyles to be had. In watching playthroughs, you'll see different loadouts, weapons, and spells. The combat system is amazing, and if that's all you care about, this game is going to be a 9 out of 10 for you easily. But there is one other aspect of the combat system that I really enjoy but also hate, and it'll segue into another topic regarding this game. In this game, there's something called morale, and your morale is basically determines which enemies you'll struggle against and which will be pretty easy. And that's why I don't like them. In practice, it's a cool system depending on what your morale rank is, most likely 0 at the start of most of the levels. And by the way, the highest rank for a player is 25. That's the highest morale rank that you can get, like, doing anything. Which, yeah, it's cool, but you also don't get access to some of your wizardry spells until you reach a certain morale rank. Also, if you're hit with a critical strike, it drops your morale rank by 1. If you die, you lose all morale and go back to 0 or back to whatever your fortitude rank is, which we'll get to in a second. There's so much to cover. The main reason I think they added these ranks was to add some dynamics to the level design and force you to explore. I say force you to explore because it's not really exploring. They're like leading you down this linear path, but it doesn't look linear, but it really is. And like I mentioned before, when you die, your level drops to 0. And if you take enough critical shocks, you might be well on your way to 0 anyways. But with fortitude ranks, you can maintain certain levels no matter what happens. And you increase your fortitude ranks by finding and planting flags around the level. And the battle flags increase your rank by 2 or 3 and also serve as a checkpoint, while marking flags only increase it by 1. And it also brings your health back up to full, but it doesn't hold the spawn point. That's the only thing. All of this combined makes the levels very repetitive and boring. You initially get the idea that you're free to explore, that you really aren't, because say for example you're hey, I want to turn left, but then you see someone with a fortitude rank of 18 and you're at 2 and you're like, okay, we're going this way, because they'll probably one-shot me and I'll have to drop back down to 0. You don't want to do that. And then when you get to the boss battle and you realize, hey, I have only found 1 out of 6 fortitude flags, so we're gonna have to go back and find all of them on this linear path that they've carved for us just so I can do the boss battle. Because if it were me, I would run straight to the boss battle, but you can't do that because you can't raise your rank unless you're going through these enemies. Now that we're already talking about these godforsaken flags, let's talk about the level design as a whole, because it's just really not good. Aside from every level being the exact same, as far as enemies finding flags, don't die, kill the boss, the levels are just literally, they just feel and look the same. Not to mention the terrible enemy variety, which I talked about a little bit earlier, but we're still not onto that yet, so stay with me. The levels are just not interesting to go through. The quality sometimes is really bad and lackluster. I don't know what that's about. Some of the textures just aren't good. I don't know why. And the buildings are often reused. Sometimes you feel like you're in the same part of the map that you were, but you're really 400 meters in the complete opposite direction. I don't know. And it'll be in quick succession also that they'll reuse the same textures, the same buildings, trees, different landmarks. The rendering is really bad sometimes. The enemies will vanish. There's pop-ins, but they're bad. It'll be really, you'll feel like you're really close, but then you'll just walk a little bit and then the enemy just appears out of nowhere. And it's kind of annoying sometimes, because sometimes you're just running into the night and then all of a sudden there's a freaking troll in front of you or whatever, a warlock. I don't really even know what the enemies are called, because it was just, at some point I just stopped caring. Some levels do look really interesting though, especially towards the end where everything's more corrupt and destroyed, but they're also structured similarly, and they also do reuse some of the levels for some of the side quests or whatever you want to call them, sub stories. I mean, you're really just doing everything you can to get to the boss fight, which is the redeeming quality of all of these levels. You have to actively search for these flags, which is repetitive and just outright boring. And I feel for a game like this, it's just disappointing that the level design is so poor when that's what brings all the elements together in the game with the combat. You have to get through the levels with the combat, but the levels are so bad that you don't even get to enjoy the combat sometimes. Now let's get to the enemy variety, because, the enemies, because there is no variety. That doesn't need, those words don't even go in the same sentence together, because there is no enemy variety. Once you get maybe not even midway through the game, a third through the game, you've seen every enemy. Just easily, you've seen every enemy. Not with the boss fights, obviously, but maybe towards the end they'll introduce like 1 or 2 more enemies. I think they introduced the assassin a little later on, and then I think another version of the corrupt soldier. But really, when you look at the enemies, they're all the same. Some are harder, but that's really only based on morale. I guess that, like I said, that's probably why the game gets easier, because you're facing the same enemies. You basically memorize all of their attack patterns, and it's so frustrating because the combat is amazing. I cannot stress enough how good the combat is. It's truly amazing. It's probably one of the best combat systems that I've played with in a while, but you don't get to enjoy it because there's no enemies to really test yourself. And like I said, they reuse bosses later on as like sub bosses, and then you get to the main boss and you already know how to beat the main boss because the game becomes way too easy. And you know, I can't even touch on the enemy variety for that long because there is none. So overall, based on all the aspects of the game, I hate to say it, but the game's like a 6 out of 10 for me. I would say 6.5 just because of how good the combat is, but then you think about every other aspect, and 6 is generous for me. And like I said, it's for me, so if you feel like the combat can push it through all the way to like a 8 or a 9, then go for it. I'm not here to change your mind. If you are so like focused on the combat that you don't care about the story, you don't care about the level design, you just want to fight all day long, you're gonna love the game because it's great. The combat's really good. But for me, I love story, I love sub stories, I love all these aspects of the game that make it good, but then there is none. So I don't know, it's pretty disappointing. I was very excited to play the game. I mean, I was excited because I knew I had that previous excitement from when I saw it a year ago, but then it did not live up to that for me. But, you know, maybe, I'm sure other people are going to enjoy it for different reasons. Like I said, if you like the lore, if you like the combat, if you actually do like the story, if you actually do like the level design, you're going to like the game. But for me, reviewing it for my own personal, like, interests, I don't like it at all. So, I don't know what video I'm going to do next. This video might take a little bit of time to upload because I have a lot of footage from playing the game. And I think I said a lot of stuff about the game in general, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know what videos, what games you want me to play, what type of videos you want to see. I thank you guys for watching. If you watched this far, I really appreciate it. Make sure you like, share, subscribe if you want to do that. Leave comments. I love to hear what you guys have to say. I'll try to get more on a schedule. I won't, but I'll try to get another video out a little sooner. So thank you guys for watching, and I really appreciate all the support I've been getting. So I don't know how to end the video, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye.